Good morning, church. I come to you today to tell my story. Before I begin, though, I want to preface my story with a slight trigger warning. I discuss serious and heavy topics, and if anyone would like to excuse themselves, please feel free to do so. I would not be offended. My story begins in COVID. In 2 short months, I lost my high school community, my church community, and lost some friendships along the way. Prior to COVID, I had already doubted much of my faith and was really pulling away from religion in general. Although I loved River Road and was still a consistent member, I was not what you would call a believer. On top of COVID and other losses, I began to experience severe body dysmorphia over my hair loss, resulting in inability to simply go outside without wearing a hat. Seems kind of silly, but it was true. It was under these circumstances that I went off to college. With low confidence, no community, and a gradual destruction of my former identity, I fell further into the valley that COVID pushed me into. At college, instead of finding communities that supported me, I found deeper insecurity. While I still technically had my family, my church community just a minute down the road from UR, and close friends from high school still just one call away, I felt incapable of reaching out. I thought that leaning on these resources would be going against what college is. A time to explore, grow, and step out on your own, by yourself. In truth, I was more alone at this time in my life than any before. It was then that I began to abuse substances. As a person breaking under stress, anxiety, body dysmorphia, and depression, I found a welcome solace and silence in drugs. It started with usage after a tough week of school, a difficult assignment, and things like that. As I left for summer following my first year, it hadn't yet reached its peak. But by the fall of sophomore year, I overworked myself through classes, multiple jobs, and a leadership role in a club, and I then used substances to cope with the stress, using daily to free myself from the constraint, constant exhaustion, and the anxieties that carried over from the previous summer. My life became a constant cycle of school, work, substances, sleep, and repeat. By the following semester, I was using at least twice a day. I began to see the world as 2 stages of life: the experiences I had to go through sober, and the experiences I got to go through high. Friends and communities at this time felt distant and detached. I reached my lowest in April of 2022. Exhausted, depressed, and alone. As I cried to one of my favorite songs, I realized that my using would have to stop because I couldn't keep living like this. Change was necessary for me to feel okay. It wasn't easy, but by leaning on my friends and family, I slowly stopped cold turkey. I began to reemerge into the world. I rejoined the church young adult group and softball team, finding fellowship in a familiar place. I began to listen a lot to Richard Rohr, a brilliant Franciscan monk who brought me a little closer to my faith. This entire time, I still was adamant on the disbelief in God. The things I'd always loved and cherished about religion, love, fellowship, and replicating the way Jesus treated others, was still a part of my life. They were still important to me. I just wasn't a believer. Flash forward to this past fall on the young adults retreat, my sister, Beth, read us a line from 1 John 4 that said, "God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them." As a person who for nearly 5 years did not believe in the existence of God, did not believe anyone was there for me throughout this pain, this passage struck me to the core. I realized in that moment that simplicity of what this passage says. God is love, not God gives love. They are literally love embodied. As I reflected on my experience of the past 3 years, I recognized God where I once could not. Regardless of my choices, whether healthy or unhealthy, my friends, my family, and my church community stuck by me through thick and thin, even if it was by simply just being. In my darkest moments, they showed me love, and I recognized them as embodiments of God. They, God, sat with me in my darkest moments and supported me through my journey back to sobriety. I want to conclude by saying, regardless of my use, God was with me. There was no magical moment where God saved me from drug use. That is not my point of this story. My point is that God walked with me, as He walked with all of us, through both the best of times and the darkest of times, regardless if you recognize them or not. They will be with me just as much now as I continue to grow and learn, as they were when I struggled with substances, just as they are with anyone who has similar struggles. Love was and will be a guiding presence in my life.